Welcome to Modern Financial Wellness, the podcast dedicated to helping you feel better about your finances. I'm your host, Jim Grace, and I'll be your guide as we discuss the psychology of money and explore the emotional aspects that shape our financial decisions and how we feel about them. A quick note before we start, although I do hope that you find the information on this show to be helpful, in no way are any of these discussions to be taken as specific financial advice. Please do your own research and talk to your own advisors, especially when making important financial decisions. So, Jackie Cummings Koski, it's so good to see you today. Thank you for joining me on Modern Financial Wellness. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm very excited to talk to you, the author of the upcoming book, F.I.R.E. for Dummies. Yes. I have a lot of questions about that.
Great.
I'm very curious what's in there, how that came to be. But before we dig into the book, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background? How did you kind of start this journey towards being a financial educator, financial planner, financial coach, just advocate for financial literacy in general? Where did that all begin for you?
So, for me, I think my big wake-up call, and a lot of times we start learning about our money when we have a big wake-up call, was at the time of my divorce. I had been married for 12 years, have one daughter, and at the time of my divorce, you look at all the, money that you have and your assets, and generally it gets split down the middle. So the big disparity that I realized we had was in my retirement account versus my husband's. So I had $20,000 in my 401k, and I thought I was doing pretty good. Now I'm in my mid-30s at this time. And then he had $120,000, and we were working, we were making similar incomes. There was no big disparity. It wasn't like, I was a teacher and he was a doctor or anything like that. He might've been making a little bit more than me. I thought we were both doing the company match. And when I saw this huge disparity, that woke me up, and I couldn't figure out why. Now, I've since gone back and I've figured some of that out. He was investing in different things. As his income increased a little bit more than mine, then that meant that he got more into his 401k. And over a 10 or 12 year period, that compound growth happens, and then that gap becomes bigger and bigger. So it took me a couple of years to sort of wake up. And, anyone that's gone through divorce, is very emotional, very stressful on your finances, your psychology, all of that. But after a couple of years, I was ready. And I said, you know what? I never want to feel this financially ignorant again. And so I said, okay, how do I learn about money, learn about finance, and make sure that I'm never in poverty again like I grew up? And so one of the very first things that I did was I joined an investment club. And it's kind of an odd place to start, but I happened to be talking to a friend on the phone. I was in Ohio, she was in Boston, and she was talking about this organization called Better Investing. And she said, yeah, they support investment clubs. There's probably one near you. So you should Google it. And so I Googled it. And when I went to these meetings, they were called like a model club, meaning that the public could come and just visit and observe what they do. So I was fascinated. These people were smart, way smarter than me. Yeah, go ahead.
So you come to this conclusion after going through this big life transition. And prior to that, you're not in financial services. You have no experience with the industry like you do today.
Correct.
So you're going to take control of your situation and educate yourself. And you Google, like all of us
Google.
do.
And at the time it was around.
You just Google.
I just Googled it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So after I started attending a few of these meetings, they met once a month. They talked about, the stock market, individual companies, revenue and profits and, PE ratios, things like that. Most people would probably be bored to death by the time they were done. For me, I was fascinated by it. And I had always been interested in the stock market, but just never knew. I never knew anybody that could, help me learn about it. So when I was around...
That's the question.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry to jump in, but that's a quick question that I had for you. You mentioned that you grew up in poverty.
Yeah.
So you didn't have any examples of folks who were investing or saving for retirement. You didn't
Not
have
at
those
all.
examples, right? Around
No,
you.
what I
Yeah.
had growing up was mostly blue collar. That my dad worked in manufacturing, and most of the people that I knew, they worked in some type of blue collar environment, which was fine. But there was no one I knew that was investing. I didn't even know what the stock market was back then. I was raised by a single dad with 6 kids, and I don't know how he
Wow.
made it. So there was some financial habits that I did pick up, as far as like his great work ethic. Try not to go into debt. So things like that. But as far as investing, not at
Mm-hmm.
all. Not at all.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of folks. My parents were very blue collar. My dad's a plumber and worked really hard. I got that from my folks as
Yeah.
well, but I don't know that I necessarily learned a lot of lessons about investing. They got 401ks late in their career
Right.
when the world changed. And yeah.
And back then
Okay.
it was mainly pension. What I was taught by my dad and most people I was around, you get a good job with good benefits and a pension. So that's the extent of
Right.
it. Now we know now that, pensions are pretty much gone, and then the 401k comes into town, and that becomes our responsibility as the employee. So for me, and I know a lot of people, that's how they first learned about investing, is in their 401k. And when I was really young, I didn't even feel like it was my money. It felt like it was so far away. I didn't know I had to choose investments. And, I think in the early days, there really wasn't a whole lot of like education or help, even in the workplace. So they say, here, you need to manage your own retirement. Here's your 401k. I'll see you later. And we're just kind of left holding the bag.
Yeah. It's funny to hear you tell that story, because I go back to my parents as well. Yeah. My dad was in a union. He had a pension. And later on in his career, they got rid of the pension. They added the 401k. And fast forward, when I became a financial advisor, I can remember, who do you talk to? You talk to your family and friends first, which is, there's some issues with that. But I remember going to see my folks and they didn't even know how to or have the ability to access a statement. It was such a black hole.
It was awful
at the time because it was so new. Yeah. It's come a long way, but I'm relating to your story as you're telling it. I think a lot of people have gone through that growing up.
Yeah. So we're in that middle, we're much younger than our baby boomer parents, and we're much, in some cases, older than, the millennials that had technology and all that the whole time. Gen Xers like myself, we were in this big transition period where we go from, having phones at your house to cell phones, to computers, to technology and Googling and AI and all these things now. So we've been through, a journey as far as accessibility of information and technology. And I think that was part of what allowed me to learn as much as I did, because everything that I wanted to learn about, I could pretty much, like you said, Google it, or I could look it up, or, I joined that investment club that, was a huge eye opener for me. And overall, what that investment club did for me, it made me feel more comfortable with understanding investments, understanding the stock market, and I wasn't afraid anymore.
Did you feel like it was a little, were you fearful going into it? Did you give you a little anxiety thinking about it before you went to that club?
Absolutely. And, when I saw the big difference in my 401k and my husband's, a big part of it was that we were investing in different things. And I think I really don't even know what I was invested in, but it was probably pretty conservative and it wasn't growing. And that was a part of solving the problem that I wanted to fix forever. And that was being afraid of the stock market and not understanding it. So, yeah.
So you fall in love with the investment club. Everybody else is getting bored of PE ratios and everything else, but you're loving it. And where do you go from there?
Well, another part of that investment club were the people. They were very smart. Every single one of them smarter than me. They were very nurturing. And I made some very, very good friends. So I continued in that investment club for like almost 15 years. So, and I guess the really important part about that is that I ended up joining the club in 2007, 2008. So that turned out that was a really, really good time to start learning about investing. So when 2008 hit
Right.
and part of 2009, I wasn't running for the hills. I'm like, this is a great time. And only because I had learned how the stock market works and, how the history of the stock market. And so that was a great time for me to really start diving into the stock market, getting money. Once I learned what I learned in the investment club, even though that was mostly about individual companies, just long term, not trading, but being a long term investor, like typically 5 years or more, you'd hold the stock.
Right.
So it made me backtrack a little bit, right? Because probably starting with investing is not the first part of personal finance that you start with. But it dawned on me. It's like, okay, so now that I'm understanding compound growth and how the stock market works, why am I not maxing out my 401k? Why am I not maxing out my Roth IRA? Why am I not maxing out my health savings account? Because you can invest in your health savings account. So then I backtrack and I started, maxing those accounts out. Those are straight up index funds. I didn't need really anything fancy, but it just set off all kinds of bells and whistles for me on how to take this knowledge that I got when it comes to, compound growth and investing and make sure that I'm applying it in all the other parts of my life. And that's what helped me. And the timing was interesting. And I feel like that is something that helped sort of fast forward my wealth building because, starting in 2008, after that, we had
opportunities for you, right?
Yeah. And it was like, we had a 10-year, bull market or 10 years where the stock market went up and really didn't have any significant pullbacks. So I got to benefit from that only because I started learning. And, a lot of things are a little luck and good timing and part of why, and I benefited from that.
Yeah, that's great. I'd imagine too, in hindsight, whereas a lot of people who had been investing for a long time and seeing their accounts go down by 20 and 30%, they're making pretty bad financial decisions at that point. And you're probably amongst a group of people that are encouraging you to take advantage of those opportunities. So like you said, timing and luck goes a long way in life sometimes.
It's very scary to see red all over your 401k statement. And I had plenty of friends asking me about it and I would give them my advice, but a lot of them just still emotion is very strong when it comes to your money. And some people, that was the only thing that made them feel good at the moment. And we know that the hardest part is figuring out when you get back in. And some of them probably never did, until maybe one day they looked at their, 401k statement years later. So I think at that moment I was also realizing that even though I knew this, it gave me more satisfaction to try to share it with other people. And I always came at it from an educator standpoint. Like I didn't want to, I wanted to teach them how to fish versus, giving them the fish. So I wanted to spend 30 minutes with them so I could show them, here's what your statement looks like. Here's how you pull it. If you want to look at, the funds that you're invested in, click this link and it'll take you to this one-page summary and you can see the top 10 holdings. You can see how it's performed the last 10 years. So I just always had that educator switch on.
Right. That's great. And so what were you doing at that point? And when did you start to get more involved as a financial educator? When did you start to make that part of your career?
Yeah. So at this time, I'm working for corporate America. I work for the same company. My last company that I was with them for 21 years. So I gave them, a lot of, I gave them a lot of years. I retired. I considered retiring early just because, I was in my 40s when I did it, but I'd been with that company for a long time. So, had a lot of conversations with my coworkers and stuff like that. As far as the financial education stuff, I think once I started learning all of these things about the stock market, investing, compound growth, and then heading back to the other basics of personal finance, as a mom, the first thing that I wanted to do was share it with my daughter. So I ended up writing this book. It was a labor of love. Part of my undergraduate program was journalism. So I was a writer. Writing was always a great outlet for me. And I said, you know what? She was a teenager at the time. She was 14. And of course, I wanted to pass on everything that I learned to her. Except at 14, she's
Mm-hmm.
not listening to anything I have to say, right? So I end up writing a book. When I saw that it was fairly easy to get a book, published, relatively easier than it was when I was, in college. So
Mm-hmm.
I started writing this book. I named it Money Letters to My Daughter, and I wanted to try to make it as entertaining as possible. So I just did them in short little letters. It's like, Amber, watch out for credit card companies with fees. They're nothing but crumb snatchers. And then I would sign off, mom that hates crumb snatch. I just try to make it funny and everything. But these were very important topics that I had learned. And once I wrote that book, it was mainly for my daughter, obviously, but a lot of other people were reading it, and, teachers were inviting me into their classrooms to talk about personal finance, the school my daughter went to. And then I went back to the school district that I grew up in, and I went there with my brother, and we did all these sessions in the school district that I grew up in. And I love that feeling. And I loved seeing their eyes light up because I was able to explain it in a way that was easier to understand. I was making it engaging. I would give away $2 bills. I would ask them a lot of questions, do exercises. And that's that was probably the bug that I got that said, this is what I really, really love to do. And it just lit me up.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So it sounds like you had this passion for telling stories and sharing what you learned and sharing the wealth with other people and helping them maybe get there a little bit quicker or get there in a way where you don't have to learn lessons the hard way.
Yeah.
Like you did along the way. That's great. That's fantastic. And what so you retired early. So to fast forward to the book, but maybe not talk about it right now. When did you start to think about financial independence and retiring early? When did that concept, if it did, when did you start to, think about that and how it applied to your world? And when did you decide to maybe leave corporate America and go and pursue other passions?
Yeah, well, here's how the timeline looks. So I'm into financial literacy, financial education, and I never dreamed that I would ever be able to do it full time. My job had nothing at all to do with personal finance. I worked for a global data company and I was an account manager. So I was just sort of doing financial education workshops. I was doing a little bit of speaking, and when I say a little bit, a tiny little bit. But I would take sometimes vacation days, weekends, and this is what I love to do. Some of it was paid, some of it was not. And at some point when I was listening to, I love podcasts. So I was listening to some podcasts that was talking about financial independence, and then FIRE, the term FIRE. I heard that for the first time, financial independence, retire early. And I'm thinking I could never retire early. And you've got some big names in there. The person that really resonated with me, it's called the Mad Scientist, but this guy's a genius. And I think he read the whole IRS code. And he was there was a lot of other people that were transparent with their finances, like on their blog. There was one called Root of Good, Mr. 1500 Days. And I just sort of went down the rabbit hole a little bit. And I think what started that out, I was doing a corporate sort of a volunteer thing at a park, and I ended up injuring myself and I broke my ankle. It was awful. But, got that all taken care of. So I had to be on short-term disability and workers' comp and all of that. And when you're on workers' comp, you can't do any work. So what are you going to do? You're going to listen to podcasts. You're going to go look at vlogs. So that's what really got me laser focused on that. And I'm trying to make it make sense to me because the FIRE movement really started with like the avatar of the young white male Silicon Valley that worked in tech or an engineer, and maybe they had a spouse and no kids. So that's changed a lot since then. But in the early days, that's what I was listening to. And I'm like, ooh, I'm none of that.
Right.
I'm a Black single mom.
Yeah.
But I took pieces from every one of them I was listening to and applied it to my situation. So I'm, I'm so curious that I'm setting up my spreadsheet and I'm saying, is there any way? I was making all these projections. I'm like, I think I can. Like the 25 times your expenses totally made sense. The 4% rule totally made sense. And so I like to have some data points and start to do the math. And it was looking like there's just no way. I mean, I was thinking the
Right.
earliest I could ever retire was like 62 or 55. And as I'm doing the math, I was able to do it in my 40s, like the 25 times my expenses. I reached that number when I was like 46. And I could have retired then, but it's kind of scary. So
Yeah.
I was having that one more year syndrome, and I continued to work another couple of years because I needed a bigger cushion. I just wasn't quite ready.
Yeah. There were a couple of things there, but when you said that you had it in your mind that you weren't going to be able to retire till 60, 62, is that what is just ingrained as you and ingrained in a lot of us that we go to school, we get a job, we work till our 60s, and then we collect Social Security and Medicare and call it a day at some later on point in life? You just had that mentality?
Yeah, I mean, that's the traditional path. That's what I was always told. And if you think about it, that's the messaging we get from society. Like Social Security tells you early retirement is 62. And then the IRS has rules around a lot of retirement accounts where you can't even touch your money until you're 59 and a half. So we're all getting that type of messaging. And that's what most of us think.
Right. Yeah. So did you have a motivation to get out of your corporate job? Meaning, were you moving away from kind of getting rid of work and going off? Because you mentioned Silicon Valley and kind of the tech guys. And I had an issue with the FIRE movement when I was exposed to it because I was anti that avatar. And it just felt like a lot of young millennial people who were just dying not to work.
Yeah.
Right. And that I don't think is my experience as an advisor of planner or just in my network. I think that's not the people that I meet when I talk to folks like you or others. Right. So where were you feeling about your transition from what you were doing and where you were going? Did you think about that at the time at all? I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on all that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a misnomer, but it's probably out there because a lot of the early, media and what was sort of in the spotlight about FIRE were people that exactly like we described, they're 29 years old and they made $200,000 as an engineer with a master's degree. Their parents paid for everything, so they didn't have to even pay their way through college. They didn't have any student loan debt. And perhaps there were some that fit that avatar. However, the way that I looked at it was, again, I never thought I would be able to do just personal finance and what I really loved, being an educator around finances. So when I saw that there was a way for me to do that, I was more so running towards that thing that I knew would make me happy. I could do it on my own terms, more so than I was running away from anything at work. I actually liked my job. I liked the people that I worked with. I liked my clients. I liked my boss. So I wasn't running away from anything, but it wasn't what I was in love with. If money had nothing to do with it, I probably wouldn't be working there. I would have been a financial educator and talking about money all day long.
Yeah. So you had found that passion for financial education, and then by educating yourself and listening to the podcasts and reading the blogs and doing the math, you saw that path forward towards that thing that you wanted to move towards.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. So I don't know if I would have been so ready to cut ties with corporate America if I didn't see this other thing over here that I'd been doing. I mean, I was hustling hard. I was doing both for at least 5 years, working my full-time job, doing financial education workshops and talks and creating content. So I was getting tired, honestly, juggling both of them. And when I found a way that I could be able to do more of the thing I liked, then that was very attractive to me, and I worked towards. And I think that's a big takeaway for a lot of people if they've even heard of FIRE, is that when you find the thing that you love, and it doesn't come overnight. A lot of people ask themselves that question, like, I don't know what I really love. How do I figure that out? Well, it may find you, and when you do that, that is a very strong force. And if you decide that, hey, this is what I would love to do, let me see if there's any way I can actually pull this off. And then that's going to give you so much more energy, so much more power to actually find ways to make that happen.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that part of the story, because that's what I run into quite a bit, is that people are headed down a path where they could obtain financial independence and they don't even really realize it.
Right.
And maybe they don't have that other thing, and maybe they don't necessarily love or hate their job. I guess that doesn't really matter, but they're moving forward because they're busy and they have bills to pay and they're doing what they think they should be doing.
Right.
All the while, again, they have this opportunity to move towards financial independence and do the things that they want to do. But they're just not aware that it's possible. So
Yeah, and
I think if there's one big...
Yeah, we're so used to the normal process of working every day for 8 hours, sleeping 8 hours, and trying to squeeze in anything else that you actually enjoy. Some people have never had the opportunity to imagine life in a different way. And so the people that I, educate, that I talk to and work with, that's usually the first thing. I want to hear about their even when I'm in high schools, the first thing I start out with is, tell me about your dreams. And I have them raising their hands, telling me their biggest dreams, because honestly, it's possible that no one has ever asked them what their big dream was. Because some of the schools I'm in, they're inner city schools, they're rural schools that have, low income populations and things like that. And because I came from that type of community, it resonates with them. I let them know that, I grew up, raised by a single dad with 6 kids, and we were in poverty, and probably everyone in this room is doing better than me. So I love to see progress, and I love to see them move the needle and imagine something different that maybe no one has ever challenged them to do.
Yeah. That's great. So you're leave corporate America, you're pursuing financial education full time, and where does that take you next?
Yeah. So when I finally get all my numbers together, and I'm like, I think I can leave. And like I said, I have one more year syndrome. So about 46, 47 when I got to, and I guess one of the other things that I decided to do as I was going down this journey is being transparent about my own numbers. I hate it that there is such a taboo around talking about money. And so once I left my corporate job, I decided to really be very open about it, which is very unusual. But I got to my number at 46, 47, worked a couple more years because I needed a little bit more cushion. And, when I finally did the math, my expenses ran between like $40,000 and $45,000 a year. That's after taxes, after contributions to retirement accounts and all of that. And most people, if you ask what they live off of or what their expenses are, they'll tell you their income. Well, it's not, because you're paying for all these other things. You're making contributions to your retirement account. And remember, I was maxing out my retirement account. So I sort of did the backwards budget where I said, okay, I was saving, here, and here. I'm paying this much in taxes. So what's left? That's what I live off of. And that came to about $40,000 to $45,000. So if you do the math, $40,000 times 25 is about $1 million. So after I hit that, I worked a couple more years, and my number when I finally formally retired from my corporate job was like 1.3 million. So I had the extra cushion that I needed. I didn't even include Social Security in there. So I was a huge pessimist. I know that. But I know, so Social Security is not going away, as long as you've got younger workers paying into the system on that, FICA line on your paycheck.
Thanks for clarifying, because people hear that and freak out a little bit.
Yes. So that's another thing that gives me more confidence. So once I retired, I did dig into the Social Security thing a little bit more, because I was solving for something different that most people talking about Social Security don't even think about. I wanted to know the minimum number of years you need to qualify. That was 10 years. Everybody I ever hear talking about Social Security, they start to talk about 35 years, which is true, but that's what the formula is based off of, and that's the maximum that they look at. They take the top 35. Well, if I work 10 years, which I work well over 10 years, I'll get something for Social Security. And for me personally, I've got 30 plus years, and honestly, retiring in your 40s, the chances of you never making another dime of Social Security wages is probably not going to happen. So I will still continue to make a little bit of money. So I'll get my 35 years. So since I didn't include that in my numbers originally, again, because I was overly pessimistic, Social Security is not going away. I did my independent research. I even got an additional certification in Social Security because I was so curious about it. So that will be around. And, by my estimates, let's say if I decide to take it at, the Social Security definition of full retirement age, 67, my benefit would be around $2,500 a month. And so that's pretty huge. So the way that I look at that now is that is my backstop in my older years. So for my 4% rule that I was applying, or that 4% rule of thumb, that's going to more than be fine, because once I turn 67 or whatever age I decide to take my Social Security, I don't even have to take 4%. I'll probably be down to like 2%. So it's nice to have that backstop. That gave me a little bit more confidence as well, as in, I kind of wish I would have left a little bit sooner, because again, I was thinking things that weren't exactly right. And there was several different roadblocks that once I started digging and figuring it out, it was okay. So once I had those roadblocks removed, I didn't have any more excuses, and I finally just did it.
Right. That's awesome. While we're talking about the numbers real quick, you brought up additional income in the context of Social Security, but did you factor in some of your financial education or some of the other work that you were doing? You didn't.
I did not. My numbers were based on living off of my investments. And the year that I retired, I retired December of 2019. So you know what happened a month later in early 2020? COVID hit. So, but one thing that I did was that I put aside 3 years worth of living expenses that was not in the stock market, because I didn't want anything to come between me and my early retirement. So COVID was very interesting. And of course, I questioned, why did I leave? And how's this going to work out? So it was a weird year for me. And I don't know if it was because of COVID or because I was retiring so early. So that was an interesting time for sure. And we now know that the market bounced back pretty quick. I think by March, the market had taken a pretty big dive. And I think by late summer, it had just, trampoline back up pretty quickly. Yeah.
So you had factor in no additional income. Right. You had set aside 3 years worth of your expenses just to make sure if there ever were an event.
Right. I didn't know about COVID at the time. I did not.
It was right around the corner.
I had no idea.
Knocking at the door.
And I guess the other thing is that I also started a master's program. So not only was I living off my investments, but I also was spending money going to college. So.
Yeah. And that master's was at K-State? Do I have that right?
Yeah, it was at Kansas State, and it was a fascinating program because I'm like, I don't want to go through a boring MBA program, and I was so turned off by those. But it was an amazing program called Financial Therapy at Kansas State, and I wanted to get my master's degree, and that financial therapy is a graduate certificate. So you could have this other piece when combined with the graduate certificate in financial therapy, you could get your master's degree. Well, that first piece was these pesky 6 classes that fulfilled the CFP requirement. And I was not going for that. I was not, but I had to take these 6 classes. I love my classmates. We actually had an amazing time. It was an online program, but so with COVID, it didn't change anything for us. Like we started it that way. I started in January of 2020. Yeah.
That is kind of interesting and a little funny that you ended up with your CFP after you had already implemented your full financial independence, retire early game plan, completely self-educated, implemented your plan, retired early, and then ended up with your CFP. But I guess attached to the financial therapy certification. Very cool.
Yeah, that's an important point because I think about that sometimes too. I was completely self-taught. Figured out how to get money out of my retirement account early, figured out the tax stuff, the health insurance, all of that stuff. I figured out, retired early, and I didn't get my CFP officially until, 2 years after I retired. And that was 2022. That was November 2022.
Can I ask you about that? Because I think it's a really interesting point. And as a financial planner myself, I work with clients individually, but I think overall our industry kind of locks a lot of people out from financial advice traditionally. I think that's changing quite a bit. We've put together and implemented a flat fee financial planning model, which I think gives us access to different types of folks. But I think still, if you're not working with a financial planner or you're not rolling over assets somewhere and paying a fee for assets under management, a lot of people don't know where to turn to get help or to educate themselves.
Right.
So where do you think people should start thinking about, how do I learn these things? How do I educate myself? How do I, kind of pursue a similar path to Jackie?
Yeah, well, a lot of people where they get their financial information or education is, social media, right? You go to TikTok, you go, especially younger people that's just starting out, where they're less likely to be working with a professional. So they're going to get it from an influencer or someone that's producing content for the masses. And so that's sort of what I do. I mean, I'm not, the social media maven or anything like that, but there's something to be said for that. Now, a lot of the influencers, you got to be really careful. So there's no shortage of information. It's just probably a shortage of good information. And how do you tell what is high quality? How do you tell what is not a scam? And how do you tell, is this person just sharing their own experience and it doesn't apply to me? So all of that. And I think the reason why I like to focus on education is because it can touch so many more people, and they can start to learn these things as soon as they want to, like literally in high school at 18 if they want to. So I think for anyone looking for that, the first thing I say is find out the way you learn the best. Are you an auditory learner? Are you a visual learner, kinesthetic, or do you like to read? And once you
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah. And so because for me, I discovered that when I was in high school, I didn't really like to read. I would skip and, just try to take all kinds of shortcuts. And as I got older, especially studying for the CFP exam, I learned I am an auditory learner. I pick up things like
the same
that.
way.
Yeah. When I'm listening to somebody, and that's why I love podcasts and YouTube. So even with my CFP program, they gave us these hard copy books and it was no online version. So I decided to. That's
why it took me so long.
Yeah. So
I just couldn't sit there.
And
I was practicing. I'm like, I couldn't sit there and read this information. I just couldn't do it.
It was so boring and it took me forever. And finally I said, you know what? There was starting to be a lot of CFPs that were creating content. That was podcasts, YouTube. They were credentialed professionals, not just CFPs, CPAs, tax experts, attorneys. And so I finally curated a really good list of content creators that were credentialed professionals that were producing content that I knew was going to be on the exam. And that was my playlist. So,
oh, wow, that's really cool.
That's what I did. And today I share that with any other candidates that's interested in that are also auditory learners. So that's my, give back to the CFP candidate community. I'm happy to share. But so once you figure out how you learn, let's say it's podcasts that you love, which is what I love, then you will start to give yourself a variety, even if it's social media. Don't just subscribe to one person's ideology. Or if someone's talking that this is the only way, this is the Mecca, you probably don't want to believe that person. Find other additional resources. Even when I do any type of research or I'm working on content, I never just use one source. I want to go to the original source, like the IRS or something like that. Then I want to go to credible sources that I'm familiar with, that I trust, and see what they're saying. And maybe I'll hit 2 or 3 more, but I need it to make sense in Jackie's mind. And you want to do the same thing. So get multiple sources of the information that you're looking for and trying to learn about. By the time you do that, it will help you discern between what's trash and what's a treasure. And it could look like, there are some good courses, there's some bad courses. Well, by doing all your digging, you might be able to determine, okay, this is a good high quality course. I understand what they're teaching, what I'm supposed to learn. and I've followed their content and I trust what they're doing. It makes sense. Plus, I compared it to, they always say, don't just get, like when you're shopping for a car, you don't just get the first car at the first car lot you go to, right? You shop and compare, you look around, you make sure you know the features. Maybe you compare it to other types of vehicles and things like that. So this education piece, this is going to follow you the rest of your life. So taking a little bit of time to figure out, is this good stuff? Is this something that makes sense? And should I trust this resource? And is this person an authority? So try to do things like that, because there is a ton of information out there. A lot of it's bad, but some of it's very, very good. And you need to be able to distinguish between the two.
Yeah. And when it comes to money, I feel like a lot of people get stressed out or anxious just thinking about the subject, right? So to set themselves down that path to start educating themselves, can you put your financial therapy hat on for a second? Okay. What would you say to those folks that are just a little overwhelmed and now you're telling me to go out and educate myself and do a lot of research? Just step one, if you're anxious, do you have any thoughts for those folks where it's just like, man, this is overwhelming, a daunting task for me to take on? What do you say to those people?
I do have some ideas. And it is from my time in the financial therapy program at Kansas State. My main professor there was Dr. McCoy, and she was from the psychology domain. So she was a family and couples therapist. And her approach was always so engaging and easy for me to learn. The main thing is give yourself a little grace. And the way you think and feel about money matters. That is really the first step, is getting your mindset right. When people ask me, what should I do first? They're ready to go open up a Roth IRA. Like they're ready to do something financial or to do something like some technical, tactical thing. And really, it's just thinking about how you feel about money. If you have any hangups about money, is it from your childhood? Is it from the environment that you've been in? Imagine like maybe what things you would want to be doing 10, 15, 20 years from now, and kind of let that sink in. Like what makes you happy? What brings you joy? And if that's the motivation to all the financial, money is really just the tool that get you to your dreams. And so if you spend time thinking about and imagining and even reimagining what that looks like, you just take a deep breath. I do these breathing exercises. I did them when I was sitting for my CFP exam. It really works. Like long, deep breaths, inhales and long exhales. And just give yourself some grace. You don't have to do everything tomorrow or everything in a week or a month or a year. So once you do, and this happened to me, at the time of my divorce, it was 2 years, frankly. But once you do that, then the next thing will be to assess where you are. So that would be things like a net worth statement. I never did a net worth statement until I was 38, but it showed me everything that I had going on. So a net worth statement is simply your assets minus your liabilities, the things you own minus what you owe. So your 401k is an asset. Anything you have in a retirement account, Roth IRA, things like that, those are assets. Your liabilities is, debt, you have in your car, the loans that you have, student loans, things like that. So it's a simple concept, but this is a very high level snapshot in time to give you a sense of where you're at. Also your cash flow, which would include your expenses, how much are you spending versus how much you're making. And this, seeing where you're at, will help you determine where your strengths are and where your deficits are and what you might want to work on first.
Yeah, that's all such great advice. Thinking about where you were, where you came from, who you are, what makes you happy. So where you were, doing that net worth statement to figure out where you're at. I can say with the clients that I work with, I'm always surprised how often I see shoulders lower and people's anxiety level go down just by seeing everything in one place and having an understanding of what they have going on. Yeah, it's amazing. Great starting point for moving forward. That's all great stuff. I want to jump into the book. So Fire for Dummies. First of all, can I ask you a quick,
Sure.
maybe not important question, but how do you become the author of a For Dummies brand book? Because that's a brand that's been around for a million years, right? There's a For Dummies book on everything. How did that come to be?
Yeah,
real quick, if you don't mind
Oh,
sharing.
absolutely not. I'm an open, no pun intended, but I'm an open book. So so For Dummies is a Wiley brand. Wiley is one of the top 5 largest publishers. Okay. So, and the brand has been around for a really long time. So for me, it came about kind of in a different way. So there's a funny backstory with that. And here's what I could say also is that, getting my CFP and having all the experience and the education and all of that coupled with my own experience, that created the perfect recipe to be the one to write this book. So originally the book started out as wealth building for dummies. And a good friend of mine who's also a CFP, she had been asked to write this book. Now, I don't even remember how that came about, but she is building her firm and it has had tremendous growth. And she had to turn it down because she just didn't have the bandwidth to do it. So when she turns it down, they ask her, do you know of anyone else that you think could write this book? So she asked me if I was interested. I'm like, yeah, of course. So of course I was interested.
As a writer, right?
As a writer, because she knew that I was a writer. She knew that, I did a lot of work around wealth building and things like that. So, but that was just the introduction. So I had to meet with all these Wiley people, share with them what I've done in this wealth building space and different media that I've had and things like that. And most of what they saw was around FIRE, financial independence, retire early, which wealth building is a huge part of that. So she takes it to her team. And she comes back, she goes, oh, they really, loved your story and they loved what you've been doing. And we think you're the perfect person to write this book. She says, but we think we want to change the name instead of wealth building for dummies, call it FIRE for Dummies. And I'm like, I was so thrilled that they got the connection. Even though FIRE is like this great fancy new word, it's really, a lot of it is wealth building. And I'm glad they were able to connect that. So at that time, that kind of sealed the deal, got the contract, laid out the time frame with crazy deadlines and everything. And FIRE for Dummies was born.
Awesome. That's a very cool story. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And I guess the first question I have about the book, and you just mentioned a little bit about it, how do you think about financial independence? How should we think about financial independence if this is the first time we're hearing about FIRE? Yeah.
So financial independence can be a general word. So specifically in the context of, financial independence and retiring early. Retiring early, that's just an optional thing you create. But the financial independence basically means you're not having to depend on a paycheck to enjoy the life that you love. And the traditional way or the customary way is that you work to be able to pay your bills. You work to be able to live the life that you want. Well, when you can finally decouple your livelihood and your happiness from depending on a paycheck, that is huge. You are independent of financially relying on a job. And a lot of people never, ever make it to that point, even if they're at the traditional retirement age. And it just frees you up. I know it freed me up. So my mind was just so different. Like the Social Security thing, I never dug into it when I was working. After I retired, I felt like the cobwebs were cleared out. I became more creative. I became more curious. I was able to surround myself with people that I admired, that I respected. When you go into a job every day, the people that you work with, they're selected for you. You don't get a choice. That's the default. And I did meet some great people. And you know what? Those people I still stay in touch with. I still have some friends that I met at work that are just amazing people that I keep in my life. But decoupling from the job works wonders. And, most people, when they graduate college or when they start working, money has a lot to do with what they choose as their career. And I know I wouldn't have chosen the career I chose if money were no factor. So finally,
Right.
when you don't have to depend on that, you've created your nest egg where you're creating your own paycheck. Once you've
Right.
done that, you can do whatever it is that makes you happy. Maybe it's to give back to around something you are passionate about. Maybe you love animals and you've always wanted to like have your own shelter. For me, that was financial education. I wanted to create a financially literate society. Big dreams. It doesn't even have to be big dreams. It could be small things like maybe you wanted to teach people to surf all day in Hawaii. So now
Right.
you have the
Right.
choice to be able to do that. And some of that work or some of those passions will end up making you money or that you'll get paid for. So there's nothing wrong with that. But to
Yeah.
not have to rely on that paycheck, it is an incredibly liberating feeling, not just financially, but mentally. Your creative side starts to come out and you are now the curator of what your life and what your days look like.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that you make an interesting point, and I'm glad that so many people are starting to talk about this, because I think that most of us have retirement as this point in the future that's tied to an age,
Right.
not an amount of money or building wealth.
Right.
And not enough people, I think, understand that that's attainable, right? That's measurable. You can do the math and create a roadmap for yourself to get to the point that you're talking about, whether it's taking care of pets or surfing, right? Whatever
Right.
or being creative or curious or whatever the things that you just listed, it's doable. So, does the book create that roadmap? Is it a bit of a how-to? How did you set up the book for folks?
Yeah, it's more of a guidebook. So, and I do infuse a little bit of my story and just anecdotes from my experience of retiring early. I mean, because I've been through every phase, the wake up call, working for corporate America, thinking about retiring early, reaching that financial independence number, and then what I'm doing after I reached that financial independence and decided to retire early. And again, the retire early part, that's optional, but I love for people to create that option. So at any moment you can walk away. Things change quickly. And so
Right.
even if you say you love your job, even if you say you love your boss and all of that, that can change in an instant because you don't have control over it. So
Right.
what you do can be done anywhere. It doesn't have to only be connected to a job. So so the book kind of it starts with some of the things that we talked about, right? Just trying to give an overview of what FIRE is, because I know that there's a lot of confusion on what FIRE is about, and as I was as well. So I kind of debunk some myths and just really talk about some of the things that we mentioned. But the first thing I do is a psychology. My professor, Dr. McCoy, she did an outstanding job, because I cannot talk about money and personal finance and FIRE and financial independence and all of that without visiting the psychological side of money. So that's one of the early things. And then talking about, assessing where you're at. So I don't just, broadly talk about it. I start to hit on the things that you would do. Do a net worth statement. Don't feel like you got to do it overnight. Even if you were able to find 2 other old 401ks that you had forgotten about, like that's a win. Celebrate your wins. And so I just take through, find out where you're starting and then hit the broad areas that are going to get you to wealth building and get you to that financial independence. So for me, it's like 3 things on either end. So there's 3 things you want to do more of. And that's, you want to increase your income, your savings, and your investing. And then you want to do less of and decrease your taxes, your debt, and your expenses. So if I had to write it on the back of a napkin on how to wealth build and move toward financial independence, it would be those 3 things. Do more of this, do less of that. And I go through each one of those in detail about how to accomplish that. I provide some checklists. Again, I include a few anecdotes, and I do a lot of community is a big part of. So when you talk about FIRE, that's easily defined, but then the FIRE movement and the FIRE community are important and a little bit different than just FIRE itself. Community is huge. It can be a lonely road. Like you said,
Right.
most people think of retiring when they're in their 60s and they can't even do it earlier than that. And so it's reimagining the typical journey of someone building wealth and moving towards happiness that they want. So community is a big part because, you want to talk to other people that kind of get it and think like you and are going to support you on your journey. And so I talk a lot about that, different events that are around, because sometimes they're not heavily, published or anything, because some of them are small, some some of them are a little bit bigger. So I talk about that. I talk about some of the really high quality, smart people in the FIRE community. And most of the people I've met in the FIRE community are super smart. But I drop a lot of those names and content creators to give people a high quality curated list of people that have reached FIRE or on the FIRE path that they can learn from besides myself, people that I got to know, voices that I heard before I ever, got to this point. So that's kind of how the book is laid out.
Very cool. One of the questions that I ask all the guests that come on the show, if there's any resources, books, podcasts that they're listening to, do you have a couple that you'd be willing to share for us that come to mind? Who would you direct people to, or where do people access the community? Because it's a pretty big, passionate community, and I couldn't agree with you more that connecting with people who think like you and get it and are on the same page is really, really important, especially when you're going to pursue something like this.
Yeah. So there's a lot. Only once you start digging, because someone that has never heard of FIRE, they may think, I have no idea. I've never seen this. So again, think about how you learn. Most content creators and educators will have multiple platforms. So they might have a podcast, they have YouTube and things like that. So probably the biggest one and the one I originally started with was Choose FI, like Choose Financial Independence. And I like their platform because they bring on so many different guests in the FIRE community. So if they're on that podcast or on their YouTube channel, that is sort of a decent vetting point that they're on their show. So if you want a single place, that's probably one of the best ones to really get exposed to so many different voices. For me, like I said, the ones that just stood out that how they were explaining things just resonated with me. So that was Mad Fientist. There's a couple called Rich and Regular. I saw them, start in the movement when they were really young and just starting out and figuring things out. They both have walked away from their job and they have an awesome platform. Nasima McElroy, she has something called Financially Intentional. She's a single mom, and she is a nurse that lives in California. She is amazing on Instagram. And she has an amazing story and incredibly transparent. So you can find all these names just really by Googling, financial independence and maybe whatever area you are really interested in. Like some people talk about getting to financial independence through real estate. Something called Bigger Pockets and Paula Pan. They talk a lot about real estate. So once you start digging, you are going to have like a huge span of all these different voices and find the one that resonates with you. And it doesn't have to just be one.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll pick your brain maybe offline and we'll link to a bunch of stuff in the show notes and on the website and everything. So people have that, a little bit of a curated list to go to. We've been chatting for a while. I want to be conscious of your time. Is there anything else you want to leave folks with to think about if they're wherever they are in this journey of understanding their own path towards financial independence? Any last takeaways or words of wisdom or advice for any folks that we should highlight?
Yeah, I think the main thing I always like to leave people with is to give yourself a little grace. This personal finance stuff, no pun intended.
I want to use that term all the time, and I always hesitate when I'm talking with clients or everybody that's beating themselves up, but it's all good. I appreciate it.
So give yourself a little grace. This personal finance stuff is hard in the beginning. It is not taught in most schools. And I think we're up to 25 states that actually require personal finance as a standalone course in order to graduate. So we're moving towards that direction, but most people have not had a personal finance class in high school. And the reason why it's in high schools, and there's a big push to get it in high schools, is because some of these concepts aren't terribly complicated, so much so that even high schoolers can grasp most of these things. So if you're not financially savvy and you haven't really focused on your money and don't really understand it, it's really not all of your fault. But now that you have realized that you do want to learn about your money and you have all these dreams and goals that now you're thinking, maybe I can do it. Just start one little bit at one step at a time. Celebrate your wins. Make sure that you are looking into your superpowers, the things that you're not that good at. You can still work on those and you can pull it all together, but just give yourself some grace and just do a little bit at a time to get to, at least at the end of the road, is this big, big dream that you may not have imagined you would be able to accomplish much sooner than you thought.
Yeah,
so
that's great advice.
I
appreciate you being here. One last quick question. Besides, where do we find the book? Okay. It's out soon. Yeah. Where should people go to check out the book? And then one more question before I let you go.
Yeah, the official release date for F.I.R.E. for Dummies is April the 30th. It is now available for pre-order. Amazon, of course, but it should be available at any online bookstore, including independent online bookstores. And pre-order that. That really does matter because obviously the publishers want to see how many people are even interested in this, and we can get it to you as soon as it is available. So I'm so excited to get this into people's hand, and it's true to the For Dummies brand by providing a guidebook to those that are interested or just curious about F.I.R.E.
Yeah. It's a great project. It's really a service to a lot of people. And you just mentioned before, it's fairly straightforward. You can do it. Everybody can obtain this and put themselves down this path. So we appreciate you putting in the effort and putting it together. One last question. This is a show about financial well-being, feeling good about your financial situation. I think we've unpacked a lot of things in our conversation today. But aside from financial well-being, just well-being in general, do you do anything? You have any habits, rituals? You mentioned some breathing exercises. Yeah. What do you go back to when you're just feeling a little overwhelmed or stressed that makes you feel good or brings you joy? What do you go back to most often?
Well, it used to be having cocktails all the time, but my doctor said that's not good. So, but no, one thing that I didn't get to do enough of when I was working, I love to hike, go on hiking trails, walk, depending on, what the weather's like. But if I could do that every day, I would have while I'm working. Well, one of the things since I retired, I have a lot more flexibility. So I don't even have to think about it or get myself pumped up. A natural part of my day, nearly every day, even if it's like 32 degrees, I layer up and I'm going to go on the hiking trail or I'm going to go on the walking trail. It's good for my physical body. And then it's also good for my mental state as well. It helps me breathe easier. I'm breathing, something nice and beautiful. And that is sort of my retreat. Even when I was preparing for the exam, if I just had enough, I just needed to go for a walk. And typically I'm doing, 3 to 4 miles a day. And it's just what I love to do. And it helps me relax. And that's just my thing.
Yeah. That's very cool. And I didn't think about it ahead of time, but, becoming financial independent frees you up for that space to do those things that help you feel better. It's all tied in, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Yeah, spending an hour and a half on a walking or hiking trail. When it was daylight savings time, it's freaking dark at 6:00 and I would get off at 5:30. So I'm, it's just so much better now that I can have that as part of my day every day.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, Jackie, it's really good to know you. I really appreciate you coming on and taking some time to tell us about your journey and again, for putting in the effort to put the book together. It's F.I.R.E. for Dummies. It'll be out at the end of April. Check it out. pre-order your copy. You can check this conversation out on modernfinancialwellness.com. The video will be up on YouTube. You'll see it on social media as well. And we appreciate you listening. Till next time, everybody. Thanks again for coming, Jackie.
Thanks, Jim.